call too. So, real informal here. This is a follow-up from the first call that we had. So those of you that weren't here for the first one or didn't get a chance to watch, or maybe even did get a chance to watch the video, I'm happy to talk about what we're trying to do with this and what it is. But mostly, to kind of start off at the highest level, it's mostly just it's an idea that I think could be really impactful, and it really is about trying to build a community around this idea and see if there's interest to kind of move this thing forward. And really the possibilities are enormous. And it is currently, it's an AI initiative, there's no question about it, and it is focused on creating a knowledge base of FileMaker training materials. And I won't go into the full rehash of last time, but just to kind of set the stage for any discussion here today, the idea is, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to yell at you guys there. So the idea is that to create a knowledge base that we can then layer on top of, and I'm using those word choices carefully because there's a couple different technical approaches here, but layer on top of, let's say, the latent intelligence that's in today's language models as it pertains to FileMaker. So I think, and this, by the way, is a conversation, not a presentation. So anybody with the thoughts on any of these things, please chime in. I look forward to hearing what everybody's thinking about these things. But in general, to kind of set the table, if any of you have used, like, let's say ChatGPT or interacted with the latest and greatest models, even like Claude's, 3.5 Sonnet, the latent intelligence about FileMaker, like if you go in and say, I'd like to create a FileMaker calculation or a script that would do such and such and such, are not 100% accurate. They are, we actually did some testing that I shared. Let's see, where is that? Not only did we have it take Matt Navarre's proficiency exam, which is not quite a scientific test, but it scored a 78 on his test that he gives to his students in his class. But more importantly, we did what's called the semantic scoring test, where we actually give it a bunch of prompts and completions. And this, by the way, as a pro tip, is a really useful technique for determining the accuracy and sort of the float of accuracy of the models themselves. But what I ended up doing was giving it about 200, this is back in 2022, so this is just GPT 3.5, just for whatever it's worth. Gave it about 200 prompts and completions. And for those of you that have access to, I think I'm sharing my screen. Yeah. Oh, wait. Screen sharing is paused. Hold on.
You're
Sorry.
sharing what looks like a keynote window.
Yeah, there we go. I don't know, for some reason it got paused. My bad. So let me catch it up. Let's see here. Resume. Let me try stopping again because it's resume. It won't resume. Give me a second to unzoom this. Okay, can you guys see latent intelligence? It says on screen now.
Yes.
Awesome, thanks. Sorry. So this is just showing. So what we did, and this, I think this is kind of interesting. We took a 200 prompt and completion pairs, and there's an example of one on screen right now. You can see that we said, for example, we were looking at, what was I doing on this one? Like a question about a phone filter, like create a calculation that filters out phone numbers, based on certain criteria. And then we gave like the completion part. The completion field is what the correct answer would be, so to speak. And we know there's not an absolute correct answer for every calculation, but the idea was this was a truthful answer. We did 200 of those, and then we tested essentially the language model, in this case, GPT 3.5. I think it was before Turbo. So for whatever it's worth, 3.5, the first iteration. And then we go and we take the answer that we get from the language model and then the answer that we said, and we vectorize those and then do a semantic matching on those. So that's kind of, by the way, a really cool sort of non-obvious use case for semantic matching, beyond find. And we do this all the time. Like for example, we score translations for accuracy this way as well too. It's kind of a neat way to do it. So what it told us was that it had a if you guys are all familiar with the semantic matching, so we got a cosine score of 0.6438 ... which is essentially, I mean, it's not scientifically accurate to say that's a 64% match, but that's about what the baseline of latent intelligence was in just this small use case test. So it gave us a little bit of a taste of like how good of a knowledge base or how reliable of a knowledge base the latent intelligence within the models alone is. And actually, that's not too bad. I mean, it's not bad. It's not zero. It's not useless. It's not great, but we would love it to be in the high 90s. So the point is, how can we augment? And I'll talk about how and then why, and then we'll just have a discussion about this. So how can we augment this latent intelligence? Well, there's two ways really that this can happen. One, we can create an entire knowledge base of these prompts and completions, which means instead of having the 200 that I used to score, we would want to have probably, in the tens of thousands, if not like ideally 100,000 plus. And I say that because if we were to do that, we would use those for fine tuning. The thing with fine tuning is we're actually like technically modifying the original model and we're creating a copy of it that has this fine-tuned influence in it, right? There does come some costs for hosting a fine-tuned model. And frankly, one of the bigger challenges with fine tuning is how much data or potential incorrect data are you trying to fine tune against? Like essentially, you're having this little battle. Like how many troops of correct information do you have against the troops in this battle that are of the incorrect information? The thing is, while it's good in a lot of fronts, in the case of fine tuning, having 30 years of FileMaker intelligence in the training data set within these models is going to be hard to fine tune against, right? So the other strategy is, and then the other part is too, which I think is important to mention, is if we went the fine tuning route, we would probably need, I don't know, I'm saying at least tens of thousands, but let's say a goal of 100,000 examples of prompts and completions, similar to what I'm showing on screen. But in addition, they would need to be created, they would need to be made into prompts and completions, for example, right? So there's a lot of effort there to actually get it optimized, the format optimized for fine tuning. Then that model has to live somewhere. And if you fine tune something on OpenAI, for example, they'll let you park it there and access it with just a, probably you guys know this, but with a slight change to the API call that you're making in the model name. However, everywhere else, like Azure or AWS or even on Google Cloud, like those fine-tuned models, you got to pay for those to be hosted. So like, for example, Azure, it's like 54 cents an hour or something like that just to host, even if you're not even, that's not even your token costs, just to host it. So when we're talking about a community-driven open source type initiative, you can kind of see how fine-tuning might, not be the most ideal thing. Maybe someday, like these costs will get reduced and these processes might get reduced. But currently, I believe my theory is, and I'm open to suggesting on this, the way to really influence the latent knowledge in the models is to do RAG. And we've all been talking about retrieval augmented generation in various conversations, and that's become a big topic in the zeitgeist within the Claris community as we talk about AI. And what's nice about that is we can just shovel information into just one big repository somewhere, and we don't have to put it into prompts and completions. It can be documents, it can be YouTube links, it can be videos or audio or just raw text. And that might be easier for us to do a community-driven initiative. So the idea would be, number one, the very first task is to create that knowledge base of information as sort of an open source, initiative to allow us to then to be able to perform RAG against this knowledge base and then be able to integrate whatever models you want. I'm a little bummed that Ronnie didn't make it, but Ronnie was going to talk a little bit about some of the access that like Claris has to some of like the Apple Foundation models, which could be one of the models we could layer onto this. But the point is, the Claris folks are interested in putting their entire help system, the knowledge base, like all the data, that the information that they have that could be intelligence that we could shovel, so to speak, into this big pile of truth. And I have compiled, and then I'll finish with this. I've compiled about 2.5 million tokens worth of stuff that I've done too, like scripts I've done for all my sessions or all the LinkedIn learning courses, and even like podcast appearances or articles, whatever. Like you guys know how this goes after 20, 30 years, you just like stuff accumulates. So I have a big pile of stuff too. And then I thought it would be really interesting if we just open this up to the community to see who's got information to, throw into the pile for not so much the fine tuning, but maybe RAG. And then the conclusion to this prologue here is then once we have that, then we can do really amazing things and give people open source access to this knowledge and let them integrate it into their products, or let their people could create, training tools and so on and so on. So let me pause there because it's important for me this not be lecture, but I just wanted to set the table for those of you that might have not been part of the first conversation. So any thoughts on any of that to begin with?
Well, I have a bunch. This is Jay. Um, hey, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So there's a premise here that this would be useful, right, at some level at some point, but it's not currently. And so that's that's something that is sort of, I don't know, defined. How do you define what would be the success at the end of this? And I'm looking at, for example, if it just the example is great, and especially the fact that you put it into testing, right, and you got back, like 64%. Yeah. Right. But for this to be like, is there a percentage where when this is deployed somewhere down the road where where we would consider that to be successful? And especially compared to the alternative. So we'll do, like, for recruiting candidates, we'll do assessments of their scripting and other knowledge, right? And we have humans review those things. And so that's one of the questions. Like, if a human looked at what the result was when you asked GPT 3.5, for that script example, what would they say? Would they say, is that passing or not passing? Like, does it work or doesn't it work? And then also, we assess how people went about things. So if they use the while function instead of a whole bunch of loops and things like that, that's a much better approach at a high level, as opposed to like how, what they put into it. Where does this become like defined as successful or useful, in that we can trust it? That's always the question. Kind of along those lines of thinking.
Yeah, two excellent insight, really important questions, and an important thing for us to be addressing here at this stage. And so a couple bullet points there. Interestingly, that same scoring technique that I was talking about before, the next stage of it is then when you introduce new knowledge, whether it's through retrieval or fine tuning, in our case, I'm suggesting retrieval, you can then continue to score again, right? So you can then see how much improvement you're getting from the model. I think this is assumed by your question, but you can see how much accuracy or improvement the knowledge set is able to influence the latent knowledge, and eventually get to sort of a threshold. And that threshold would certainly be something we would have to determine, all of us, is what's acceptable. And I think that threshold could also be determined through expert reinforcement or human in the loop testing as well too, which Heidi, I see your hand going up, so I don't want to step on any thoughts you might have on that before I continue with any of this stuff. Go ahead.
It was actually Chris raising his hand, but we both had comments. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, well,
good. Chris is there too. Hey, Chris.
Hey, how you doing?
Why don't you start? Yeah.
So, I mean, like you, we have a garage full of projects from over the years and stuff like that. And I guess I would just want to caveat this idea that, hey, let's clear out the garage and throw it in the pile, that it be, decrusted to some extent, and say, let's not throw stuff in there that has, dead ends and old scripts and deprecated stuff and big blocks of commented out code and stuff like that, that if we contribute to the pile, that we try and sanitize it first and make sure, it's efficient code.
So I actually think there should be some kind of staging area for people want to throw in something, some kind of staging area, rather than have to go and, reinforce everything or, score everything, that there should be a staging area. For example, like we have a PDF of, I don't know, FileMaker 14 training. Like, I wouldn't want to throw that in there, but someone might, right?
Yep.
And so there should be some kind of staging area ready instead of throwing everything in there.
Agree. And by the way, the probably versions should be included in that consideration as well, too, right? Like, I mean, how much would
Yeah,
we be concerned about
absolutely.
FileMaker 13 related training materials versus the more current versions? So there's definitely some thoughts on in those areas. But yeah, you guys bring up excellent points. So with talking through
Can I
that,
say one more thing?
yeah, please.
So, want to keep this just for sanity's sake? Would you want to really just keep this to, the support, basically the current version and the last version, or would you not?
Well, my instinct, just like if I put my trainer hat on, I would say, yeah, keep it, FileMaker plus, 19 plus or something, just whatever, like the modern day versions. But then like the reality that we're all aware of is that, I think a shockingly high number of actual users of FileMaker are on older and sometimes much older versions of the platform. So it's like, who would be the constituents of this tool? And we'd have certainly some knot we would have to untie and figure that out as far as what the target would be there, certainly. So yeah, a really important question there. And as I was going through all my stuff, like, yeah, I have a bunch of old stuff, and then like I was like, what would be the line in the sand on what we want to pass forward? And my instinct just tells me like 19 and higher, or just the latest and greatest. I don't know. That's an important question to throw out on the table, no doubt. And now, Heidi, you'd said something about reinforcement, and I might have mentioned reinforcement too. I certainly think that, first of all, staging sounds like a brilliant idea. Then once there actually is a oh good, Ronnie is going to come. Hold on, let me just send that to him. Once there actually is a knowledge base somewhere that people are actually interacting with, one of the things that I think is really special about the Claris community, and something that I'm really proud of about all of us, is that it's such a huge, vast community. Like we have 50,000 plus individuals worldwide that could potentially engage with this. And so, so kind of moving backwards a little bit, like the whole reason that like ChatGPT even has like a free version in the first place is because they want us to go in and interact with the questions and provide questions that they're getting answers for, and see how useful we find those. And that's where the whole thumbs up, thumbs down thing comes into play. That helps improve their model training moving forward. Well, we can actually, even when it comes to RAG, like one of the ways that you can do expert reinforcement on RAG is like you can actually identify. So like Heidi, let's say it's not ideal that like a misinformation would go from a contributed, like a donated knowledge set into the knowledge base, and then make it all the way through into like, let's say, a chat bot that somebody's using that's interacting with it. But if as a fail-safe sort of at that stage, I think it would be important to have to allow for expert reinforcement on the back end, to allow people to identify, hey, that was a wrong answer. Let me thumbs down this, much like what I'm showing here. Let me redo that. Thumbs down it, give the not factually correct, whatever it is, put the right information in. And the cool thing about RAG is that then we can actually go find that actual row in the vector database or the vector store and update it or remove it or whatever it is, right? And then in the first presentation, I kind of went down this path of, I don't know, this might be a little too sophisticated, but this birdwatch method, which is the community participation where, there's different weightings for different expert levels. I don't even know how we would, determine or achieve those, but But you know, just like we have some people who are active contributors on the forums, you could have some individuals who are identified as active contributors to the knowledge base, and they could upvote things and downvote things or whatever it is. So I think we would I get just in general, just throwing out those ideas. I think it's important that we recognize that we would have to, this would be a continuous process too. The accuracy farming would have to be continuous as this was deployed. And the good news is, I'm trying to garner some excitement by this, but the good news is having a community like ours, you know, with 50,000 people worldwide and some really, really active contributors already, I think would actually make that very useful and very valuable. So, that just a thought there on, you know, the ongoing process of keeping the information clean. Now, so Jay, really getting back to your main point is, how do we know when it's acceptable? I think there's another thing that I would introduce into the conversation there too, and that is like, acceptable for what, right? Like, like, I'm not even baiting. I'm just like, as I'm thinking through the answer, acceptable for creating code that we would assume is good, like a Copilot, and it runs right into production, for example, or acceptable for learners. And then we go, okay, what level of learner? Like, you know, this could be perfectly acceptable of an answer for a beginner learner, but someone who's at a mastery level or something, maybe that level of accuracy needs to be a little bit more fine-tuned. So I don't have an answer to give there, but I think it's a discussion that needs to happen about, like, what level of accuracy do we want and need, and how do, you know, and certainly how do we achieve that is the next stage of it too. But what we find is that having human reinforcement or human in the loop on the front end allows us to actually determine, so we can actually do scoring accuracy. Then we can have humans or volunteers go in and say, okay, well, I think this is useful, or I would score this on a 1 to 10 scale. I would give it a 7 or an 8 or whatever it is. And we can do that a few hundred times. And then what we end up getting is like this measure of this is what humans said was accurate and acceptable. And then we go look behind the scenes of what all the 9 to 10 starred items were, and we see what their actual semantic score was, which allows us to determine what an acceptable threshold would be from a semantic scoring standpoint. And that helps while we're in production. So there's a couple ways to do that. It's just like, you know, the important thing is like, is 100% accuracy what we're hoping to achieve, right? Like that's the first thought on this. And frankly, Jay, honestly, that's why my first instinct on this was to look at it from a training standpoint rather than a coding and production standpoint, even though I think both are achievable. Training me,
Yeah.
you know, I'm not saying like we could just give wrong answers standing in front of a group of people just because they're beginners, but there's a level at which they need information, and maybe the intelligence is acceptable at the beginner level and the intermediate level. It's just that it gets a little, you know, blurry up at the mastery levels, you know.
Yeah, it's not like
Sorry.
it's not like we don't have that criteria now for, you know, how we learn to code and then actually put it into practice and then deploy it, right? Those standards exist, like whatever method we're using. So this is you know, towards doing things better in some combination of what we do now and what's the future. So like this is this supports that. And as Vince always tells me, like, you know, AI, machine learning, you can't just turn it on and it will cook you breakfast, right? This is machine learning is all about the process of over time improving it. So this will take, you know, this will take some time. But totally understood.
Vince, you had some thoughts about that?
Yeah, I just wanted to, you know, bring into the mix, like I had mentioned in the Discord channel, like, I mean, Inspector is a tool that analyzes solutions. I wonder if, like we said, this would be a great way to feed data through that medium and then say, okay, if you check this option, it's going to feed it into the tool in some constructive or organized way. But, you know, it begs the question as to, like, these solutions are unique and custom.
Yep.
You know, like, it's like, what are we looking for? How, like, are we looking to figure out what the best way to use the let statement, or are we looking what's the best way to make a delivery? You know what I mean? It's
Yep.
there's
Well-
the conundrum in my sense. I'm not sure how people think about it.
Well, personally, I'm glad you brought that up because, like I mentioned on Discord, you really got my wheel spinning on that. And so if we really think of what language models are doing, since they're, we're all database people, so we're all used to like putting something in this thing and then retrieving it out in the same state that we put it in, right? And it's really hard for folks like us to think of how the learning and the training is actually happening, from a transformer standpoint, where it's actually taking information and learning, right? So the thing that I'm most excited about your suggestion, Vince, is that if we give examples of here's how somebody was using a let function to solve a problem or to achieve a goal, maybe that's a better way to put it. Because like essentially like a calculation achieves a goal or a script achieves a goal, right? If somehow we're able to articulate what it was trying to do and this is what it did, and we give it a thumbs up and say that's legit, that's giving the models an example. It's helping it learn and understand like how to solve problems or to get outcomes using the tool set that we have with FileMaker, which is really fascinating. So to me, having mechanisms like in an inspector where you can say, here's this thing and this is what it did, and this is an example of it, and feed it right into this knowledge base is extremely exciting. The thing that I thought about was like, the first thing that I think about is like commented scripts or commented fields. Like it's somehow articulating in the schema what the goal or the desired outcome was of this thing, right? So,
Yeah.
you just have a script on its own. You don't know what its intention was, other than
Right. Yeah, and just to follow up on your comment there, I think it makes me think that we might not want to do it carte blanche and say here's all my scripts and my solution and I'm going to just shove it over to your system. But maybe the way to do it is intentional, and everybody goes through their scripts and writes a little summary of like what the script was meaning to do and how it worked and has it worked effectively, whatever. And again, there's a review process, but maybe that intentional attention to saying, here, I want to submit this, be it a calculation, whatever it is, and then have only those pieces that have been curated or reviewed or commented, I should say, get submitted rather than carte blanche everything over.
Love it. Yeah. And my response there is just simply, it's not necessarily quantity that's going to make this good. It's going to be quality that makes this good. So 100% plus wanting your thoughts on that and that process there. And Heidi, you had a comment as well. Or Chris.
Yeah, so plus one on the commenting and maybe having, like a template or a minimum standard, like this is the format for submission so that we can ensure some consistency. But the other thought I had was when we were talking about possibly having a staging area or maybe having people likely asynchronously sort of agreeing, okay, here are some good examples of, branching logic or iterative loops or logging or whatever it is that, there's already a paradigm for this sort of, non-linear collaboration. That's Wikipedia's, rules of engagement that they have for people to comment on something like, yes, this is a good thought, or this could be handled better, or something like that. And so as far as making this a collaborative effort, maybe looking at the Wikipedia paradigm for collaborating on curating some of this stuff.
So Chris couldn't see the slides, but I think there's two different areas here, right? There's possibly having a staging before it goes into the area where it would be used for RAG. And then there's a second part where you talked about the expert reinforcement with RAG, where you can correct things that were wrong, etc. And so kind of a...
Yeah.
Right, I get that. I think it would be, we would have to do less reinforcement if we had really strong curation at the beginning of the funnel, so that we said, here's 20 great examples of dynamic nav bars. And, we all agreed that, these are great examples. And so then you would have less of that on the back end.
Yeah, and Chris, just to acknowledge, this Birdwatch thing that was me just researching how community notes worked, and I think now that I'm hearing you talk about the Wikipedia structure, I think that actually might make more sense than the Birdwatch mechanism for 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 our use case here. So great suggestion there.
Can you post a link to that paper too? I mean, I can barely see it, but
Yeah, I don't know why I haven't thought to share this. I'll put some of this stuff up on Discord actually. And not the least of which is the slides too. I can't believe I haven't. I guess I put the video up, but not the slides. So I'll share all this stuff as well. The other thing that's kind of interesting, I mean, not that anybody needs motivation for it, but one of the advantages of going with the RAG approach is that and often we're also focused on like the actual vectors and like let's say we're like chunking up a PDF document or something. Really, the only metadata that most people think about there is like what's the document name and maybe even like the page number or something like that. But we can put whatever metadata we want on these rows within a vector database. So for example, you could put the contributor or whatever attribution the contributor is interested in. And now we're not retrieving information, but when we do RAG and we like someone asks a question about a let function and there's 20 different records that are related to let, or maybe more, but whatever, just for the sake of discussion, there's 20 different records that are referring to a let function in the vector search results. We could cite those as well too. So if and I don't think people would contribute this. No, I don't think people would be motivated to contribute to this initiative just for citation and attribution, but there is a way we could actually send attribution back to whatever sources. So, like you could say, oh yeah, this part of this answer came from so-and-so's paper on blah blah blah, or a video that they have up on YouTube, and there's no reason not to cite those things. Actually, I think it's a more useful user experience. So just kind of thinking through that way too. Yeah, Vince, your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of just mention a meeting we had, like a Dig FM meeting we had last night. Kevin Frank presented JSON query. It's a custom function that Steve Senford Herrera put together. Steve has a very interesting approach to the way he does things, and basically he has a little abstract, like there's 4 quadrants, and then there's the code itself, there's what the code does, there's some sample data, and then there's the outcome. And so imagine if you would you say we're putting out a call for examples of the let statement, like you get 1,000 back, and they all have this structure of like there's an example code, what it's doing on that example code, how it's being structured, et cetera, and those are like, again, those are rated, they're reviewed, there's some descriptive text that could be that could be used for the embedding, for the searching of what I'm looking for. Like I'm looking for a let statement that does this and that, right? So again, focusing on just the components maybe, rather than solving problems. And then once you have all the components, you have the building blocks, then you can get to work with, like, I need this building block to do this, and I need it now to do this other thing. And so anyway, I was really inspired with again, I'm always a big fan of Steve, but if you get a chance to watch last night's recording, it'll be probably posted in a week or so. But I really encourage everyone to see it. It's a phenomenal piece of work that Steve has done, and a great presentation by Kevin.
Hey Vince, if you think about it, if you could share that on Discord when the link goes live, I'll watch for it myself, but maybe other people would find that interesting. And just to like the whole idea of describing the information within the data itself, whether using the technique that you just described or something similar, I think is going to be what makes something like this a home run. The thing that I'm thinking of, even though it's sort of a loose example of that, is like if you look at the popular custom function repositories, where like kind of the community sort of loosely agrees on a structure for explaining in the comments what it is that they're doing and what the goal was and how they're what the variables might be, and then they list the function after that. Something like that might provide, in addition to, or maybe using the exact techniques you're talking about, might provide really important structure and compartmentalization of these objects, which will make it easier to bolt them together and identify them and let the models learn from those as well too. So guys, this is so fun. I just like, I think there's so much like just big thoughts and smaller thoughts here, to talk about on all this stuff. And so the one clarification I wanted to give was that I think that, well, first of all, we just unraveled like a bunch of things we need to think about and considerations and how people can be involved and how we can control truth and what levels of truth are important and all those types of things. To me, the tip of the spear, the wedge of this whole initiative is really just creating the knowledge base and like purifying the knowledge base, right? Then after that, originally, oh my goodness, who is this guy? And before I hand the floor to my favorite Star Trek fan, that's just a shout out to the podcast episode that I hope you guys all watch. But the point being there is that really, I think the first part is like enriching and purifying the knowledge base. After that, we can talk about whether there's a chat interface or a series of APIs that already have language models included, or there's some sort of way you pick the language model you want, and then the RAG source is there available to you. And we give people a bunch of documentation on how they can connect to those via an API call. That's, I think, what the first problem is that we need to solve. And then we can think about, or the establishing and determining the knowledge base accuracy, that's I guess the term I'm looking for, is step number one. Then we worry about what we do with it after.
Totally agree. Sorry I'm late, but
Hey, Bev.
we need to know what it is we're collecting and sort of why.
No question. And actually, Ronnie, that
will determine greatly what we use to store it, to read it, all that good stuff from there. We just have to know what we're collecting and why.
It's such a great point. And Ronnie, your thoughts from a Claris perspective. First of all, welcome, thank you, and thank you for being supportive of this whole idea in the first place. You've got so many good thoughts about this as well. One question came up earlier, like, what should be the version cutoff of this knowledge base?
That's a good question. I would point back, do you need a cutoff?
I guess.
Should there be one, is I think, right? That might be my first question. And the reason is, I don't think it should be constrained onto like, what Claris says as far as supporting and things like that. We've got customers who are still using FileMaker 12, and that's perfectly fine. There's no reason why not to provide information. As a matter of fact, our knowledge base has articles that go back like FileMaker 5 and 7. So I would pose the question is, do you need a cutoff date first?
Yeah, it just occurred to me now that I asked that question out loud, is that we talked also a moment before about capturing additional meta. So first of all, we've established that there's really two options for influencing the knowledge base, just to bring you up to speed. Fine tuning, but as Ronnie, you and I have talked about in the past as well too, that's kind of a nothing burger here for various reasons.
Form and function.
Form and
function, not for content.
But at some point, if fine tuning becomes more approachable, or the methodologies are different, or the road rises from a modeling standpoint, the knowledge base will still help us get there, right? So it's not that the choice is one or the other forever. But establishing RAG is essentially establishing vector stores of data. We can add additional metadata. So we talked about citation, like adding who the original contributor was, for example, for citation purposes. But one of those easy ones could just be the version.
Yeah.
Right? And then in the API call, you could literally say these, this is part of the metadata. This is metadata.
Yeah. For sure. I would say, at first, I'd say probably I wouldn't be too concerned about cutoff on things like that. I'm a huge Agile and Scrum person, right? Advocate. I've spent quite a bit of time on that, and so my push would be to get something small but done quickly. Like, let's get something up and running with the least amount, with the smallest amount of possible resources and data and get Heidi just said, yeah, just get a win. Let's get something up and running. Let's figure out if I love your approach, Chris, on the learning. So if we were to create something, what would be the smallest thing that we can create that helps on a learning path that would could utilize, this data, and so that we can determine, let's get the minimum amount of data possible to get something up and running quickly that we can use. Doesn't have to be open for everybody. Maybe this small group here, we test it out, we use it, we refine it, and we'll find out. We're going to find out questions that we can't think of right now, right? As we go through it. So my suggestion would be let's get something up and running quickly, and count me in as much as possible to do that, and so we can get something under our belts as quickly as possible.
My immediate thought there is it Claris's knowledge, right? Like if you guys were doing this, you would contribute like what I think I'm sharing. Yeah, what we're looking at here, help knowledge base. I loved your idea, Ronnie, in one of our private conversations about DevCon sessions, if the actual presenters were willing. Webinars as well, too. You guys have a wealth of them, and you're creating even more now. And then even customer stories for that matter, too, right?
Yeah.
As long as everybody's cool with that, the reason I think that might be a good place to start is because a lot of what we've talked about so far in this call today was refining the information and the accuracy of the information. We can trust that Claris, has already gone through those processes in your data sets, right? So is that the first obvious step, is just taking inventory of what you guys have already talked about wanting to share in the knowledge base and making that the first step?
I would start with the smallest part. Like we can take the help very quickly. The knowledge base requires it's massive, and it requires a whole dump, and it has to go through a process. So we can get it, but you've seen it. It's a massive thing, and it does require some processing to do. But the help is fairly easy for us to pick up. DevCon sessions can be done, but my suggestion again is start small as possible. I would say let's go with the help. If you've got some great training material already kind of curated and set out, let's take that and what anybody else here can contribute. Let's put it together and let's try something out. It's gonna fail, but let's try something out. Let's put all the data and see what happens. We're gonna learn a lot. We're gonna learn a lot by just trying something, right? That's my suggestion. Again, trying to go to agile route. Right, let's get something up and running quickly.
So well, it sounds like we're in agreement, and I think people in general, I mean, it's such a practical approach. Like what's the simplest move forward, less friction, don't have to worry about accuracy and all that kind of stuff as well too, which we will, moving forward. So then it really boils down to the practical things like, okay, cool, we know, like for instance, Claris has help done, right? And by the way, just out of curiosity, you have help, you have the original, like I've tried to work with the HTML embedded help, and it's a little noisy, but
for sure. We could probably get a dump of just a text. All of those. So I would call on internal resources to get a dump of those. Not an
web scraping is not going to be helpful.
It's not good. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
I tried.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
The other part that might be interesting is that if it's FileMaker help, so one of the really Vince just brought up something really interesting about different methods for describing the data itself. And so I wonder if and this might not be a yes, but is the first step to say, do we all agree on like a common structure of the knowledge, or do we just like shovel this into vectors and see what happens? And I'm not saying that's a bad approach. Shoveling into vectors and see what happens is actually pretty magical sometimes. But the idea is, like, before we get started, do we say, okay, we want to at least do some classification, like here are functions versus scripts versus whatever. And I say that because your help system has some of that built in already, right? And maybe that ends up being an infrastructure that could support future contributions.
Yeah. That's a good question. I would almost say I would almost most of that information will be part of the metadata anyways, at least from the help and the times that I've used it, because I've already done some testing with the help as well. it's included in the metadata, so a lot of it kind of just falls through, just boils up automatically. Again, I would just try to, I'd say we just shove it in and see what happens, right? And if it fails, then awesome, then we know, yeah. Again, I like trying stuff out first and then iterating on them.
Well,
One thing I was thinking, by the way, so besides the help, I mean, we do have the FileMaker Training Series. It's outdated by a couple of versions, but I think the essence of it is really, really good, right?
I'm a fan of FTS still, even after, I mean, what was it, 15?
Yeah, version 17 or 18 is
17.
the last one. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, but I think it's very well written. There's got some great examples in there, and so there's some stuff in there. We can just scrape that and it's just
like
PDFs, right?
foundational elements,
Yeah.
Most of that is still relevant today, and that's
Oh, for
not
sure.
commentary on the FileMaker or anything. It's just
Correct.
like relationships are relationships. Like we'll take that
Correct.
section, right? Or
Exactly.
I mean, yeah, FileMaker 17 being the baseline there. No, that information is fantastic. So
Yeah.
that's I guess what I'm thinking of on the how. We start with help, and you guys have metadata and structure to it, and you're describing it. Then all of a sudden we go with a different structure of data, like a long form narrative, FTS materials, which I think is also a great contribution.
Yeah.
Do we try to classify that information somehow, or do we just do like really high level, like, like the topics, like the relationship scripts, calculations, and then make those the classifiers or something like that? Like, I don't know too much about what the metadata is or how you guys structure help. I mean, it's probably pretty obvious if we look at it, but do you think there's a unified structure that we could feed both of those sources in and then maybe establish some guardrails for future contributions that way?
I see what you're saying. That's a good question.
It might be the thing we explore first,
Yeah.
The FTS is going to have more complete content. So where the help will say, here's an example, and we'll use the script step and maybe a couple functions and maybe another script step. And the FTS then will show you an entire, structure for a script that's really long and the example layouts of how things are placed and like that would be a little more information than what we could get just from help.
Yeah, and I think even within help, I think as far as structure of the information, like the script steps and the calculation functions have a very explicit structure to them. It's description on top.
The references, the reference, the reference section, is very, very structured. Yeah, those are very, very,
That's what I actually used exclusively those. I used when I did the original test a couple of years back, I used like literally the examples of the code that were provided in the FileMaker help. I had to do some manual copying and pasting of it, but that structure is super helpful. So maybe is the tiniest wedge the help?
I literally have those, at least for the script steps, I have them in a database. So I already have those because I've been playing around with those as well. So I already have those that we can absolutely use. The calculation one should be fairly easy to get as well. So we can get those. That's not. So we could, like, for example, get the help and we can. I think what I'm trying to say is that we can parse these in whichever way we want. Like if we want to put the reference because of the structure, because of their I don't know, technical aspect, right, on describing something very very objectively, we can tag those separately and in their own, with the metadata correctly, so that so it's found correctly, right, when we're doing the retrieval portion of it. So we can use those. Shoot, I was gonna say something else. Oh, I was I know it sound like a joke right now, but I was wondering right now. So I was talking about the FTS, is that I wonder if at some point our long-term goal is that whatever agent or something like that get built with this content is able to pass the certification test.
I think it's, well, first of all, I think that is a fun thing here.
Just as a
This is what I would suggest is our next steps, and then the step after that, and it kind of answers your question as well too. I was sharing with the group earlier, and you might remember this from our first call, where what I just alluded to earlier, where I took like a couple hundred prompts and completions from help and tested. Unfortunately, this is a little bit old now because it was just the 3.5 model the one that
Mhm.
preceded Turbo for OpenAI, and we got like a 0.64 back or something, right? I think it's really important for us to establish a modern baseline. So I think would be step one, which is going to come from the help system, is let's figure out what construct the help system would be in. And from that construct, can we get prompts and completions for semantic testing purposes? Like we can just go with the calculations and scripts and maybe some obvious answers, but like right from the help, right?
Mhm.
And then do a and I'm not like an OpenAI fanboy or anything. I think right model for right job or whatever. I use all different models all the time myself, but like we just pick one is to establish a baseline, but maybe make it a more modern one, like a 4.0 or something like that. And then we go, okay, the 2024 summer of 2024 baseline latent intelligence of just the model.
Yeah.
With these 200, or maybe if we do more, it'd be great. I mean, as long as we're putting all this help, like if I didn't have to copy and paste all those, I probably would have done more than 200. But since we're going to put all this information together anyways, maybe we can create these prompt completion pairs like in the hundreds, and then do another semantic test against, we'll just call it 4.0 or 5 or whatever's available when we finally, who knows, tomorrow it could be 5. Then step 2, that one's kind of easy, right? Step 2 then is we go, okay, now all the help system is in a vector store somewhere, right? Now we run those same things with vector. And I know it sounds like we're giving an open book exam to the test here, but that's exactly what we're doing.
What it does. That's
the whole point. So now we
can
can go, okay, we were a 0.63 with 3.5 back in 2022. Now we're a point whatever, just for conversation, 7.2. Then when we add just the help, we're up in the 0.78s. Like, wow, look at what we're able to do. Or maybe we're in the 0.85s or something. Like, who knows? Maybe help is significant. So I think that's where we start. And then the part 2 of it is just simply this, I think, is a really interesting discussion that we could open up to the wider audience and get in. I think people might find it fascinating, frankly. Vince, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, so you were talking a few minutes back on the structure that you want to use to rate these. One of the things that we like to think about is solving the problems differently.